Simonds' revenge after Montgomery fired Krar, destroyed every elite German unit in France. Complete narration script. The date is August 1944. The beaches of Normandy are littered with the remnants of the largest amphibious invasion in human history. Allied forces have carved out a foothold in Nazi-occupied France, but now they face something far more terrifying than the initial landing. The German Wehrmacht, bloodied but far from broken, has regrouped. Elite SS Panzer divisions, battle-hardened veterans from the Eastern Front, and fanatical Hitler Youth units have transformed the French countryside into a killing ground. Every hedgerow hides a machine gun nest. Every farmhouse conceals anti-tank positions. The bocage terrain of Normandy has become a meat grinder, and the Allies are bleeding. In the midst of this carnage, British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery makes a decision that will change the course of the war in ways no one could predict. He fires Canadian General Harry Crerar from active command, citing poor performance and lack of aggression. The humiliation is public, brutal, and deliberate. Krar, who has served his country with distinction, is effectively sidelined at the most critical moment of the European campaign. His deputy, Lieutenant General Guy Simonds, watches this disgrace unfold with barely contained fury. Montgomery doesn't know it yet, but he has just unleashed something far more dangerous than any German panzer division. Guy Simonds is not the kind of man who accepts humiliation quietly. He is a tactical genius with a photographic memory, a man who has studied every battle from Cannes to Stalingrad, who can recite the exact composition of every Wehrmacht division in France from memory. More importantly, Simonds is a man with something to prove and nothing left to lose. What happens next will shock even the most hardened veterans of the Second World War. Simonds doesn't just want to win battles. He wants to annihilate the enemy so completely, so brutally, that Montgomery himself will be forced to acknowledge what he has done. And Simonds knows exactly how to do it. He has been watching the Germans, studying their tactics, learning their weaknesses. He knows that the elite units Montgomery fears so much, the ones that have been slaughtering Allied troops for weeks, have a fatal flaw that no one else has recognized. The German command structure is brilliant at offensive operations but catastrophically vulnerable when forced into defensive warfare. Their elite units, trained for blitzkrieg tactics and rapid maneuver warfare, have been locked into static defensive positions by Hitler's direct orders. No retreat. No tactical withdrawal. Stand and die. Simonds sees this not as a strength but as an opportunity. If he can create the right conditions, he can turn the Germans' greatest asset into their ultimate weakness. But first, he needs to overcome a problem that has plagued Allied commanders since D-Day. The bocage country of Normandy is a defender's paradise. Ancient hedgerows, some dating back to Roman times, create natural fortifications every 100 meters. Tank attacks become suicide missions. Infantry assaults dissolve into confused melees where Americans shoot Canadians, British fire on Poles, and nobody can tell friend from foe. The Germans have mastered this terrain, using it to inflict horrific casualties on every Allied advance. Simonds has a plan that seems insane to everyone who hears it. He wants to attack at night. Not just any night attack, but a massive armored thrust conducted in complete darkness across terrain that experienced tankers refuse to cross even in daylight. His own staff officers think he has lost his mind. Night attacks are chaos. Friendly fire incidents multiply. Units lose cohesion. Tanks drive off cliffs or into rivers. The historical record is clear. Large-scale night armor operations don't work. But Simonds has been preparing for this moment his entire career. He has studied the German night defensive doctrine and found its weakness. German units rotate their frontline troops at night, moving fresh soldiers forward and exhausted men back for rest. For approximately 90 minutes every night, the German defensive line is in flux, with units in motion and communication networks temporarily disrupted. If Simonds can hit them during this precise window, with overwhelming force concentrated on a narrow front, he can punch through before the Germans even realize they're under attack. The plan he develops is called Operation Totalize, and it represents the most sophisticated combined arms assault conceived up to that point in military history. Simonds will use heavy bombers to create a carpet of destruction ahead of his advance. Artillery will fire on predetermined coordinates using innovative night firing techniques. Specially trained Pathfinder units will mark the route with radio beacons. Infantry will ride into battle aboard armored personnel carriers, a revolutionary concept that will protect them from the machine gun fire that has been decimating foot soldiers. But the real innovation is psychological. Simonds understands that the German defenders expect attacks to follow certain patterns. They expect preparatory bombardments. They expect dawn assaults. They expect to see the enemy coming. Simonds will give them none of these advantages. His forces will attack in total darkness with no preliminary bombardment. The first indication the Germans will have of the assault will be the sound of hundreds of tank engines emerging from the night like mechanical demons. August 7, 1944. The night is moonless, perfect for Simonds' purposes. Over 1,000 Allied aircraft have been assembled for the operation. 600 heavy bombers will strike first, dropping their payloads on German positions with a precision never before attempted in night operations. Following them will be medium bombers, then fighter bombers, creating a rolling barrage of high explosive that will advance ahead of the ground forces. The bomber crews are terrified. Night precision bombing is extraordinarily dangerous. Navigation errors are common. Bombs often fall on friendly troops. Many of the pilots flying tonight have never conducted a night bombing raid of this scale. They know that mistakes will be measured in Canadian and British casualties. But they also know that Simonds has calculated every risk, has accounted for every variable. They trust him in a way they never trusted Montgomery. At exactly 11:30 p.m., the first wave of heavy bombers releases their payloads. The ground erupts in fire. German positions that have been impregnable for weeks simply cease to exist. Concrete bunkers collapse. Tank traps disappear. Entire companies of elite SS troops are buried alive or vaporized. The bombardment is so intense that it can be felt in England, across the Channel. Seismographs record the explosions as minor earthquakes. The German defenders are in complete panic. Their communication lines are severed. Their command posts are destroyed. Officers who survive the initial bombing cannot reach their superiors for orders. Hitler's directive to stand and die suddenly seems less like a strategy and more like a suicide pact. But these are not ordinary soldiers. These are the elite of the Wehrmacht, men who have survived Stalingrad and Kursk, who have been trained since childhood to follow orders without question. They stay at their posts even as the world explodes around them. Then comes the sound that will haunt German survivors for the rest of their lives. Through the smoke and fire and chaos they hear engines. Hundreds of engines. The distinctive rumble of Sherman tanks, the higher-pitched roar of British Cromwells, the deep growl of Churchill heavy tanks. The sound grows louder, closer, until it seems to come from everywhere at once. And then, emerging from the darkness like prehistoric monsters, the tanks appear. Simonds has assembled the largest concentration of armored vehicles ever committed to a single night operation. Over 300 tanks are moving forward in 3 parallel columns, each column guided by radio beacons carried by Pathfinder units. The tanks are driving at speeds considered suicidal in daylight, let alone in total darkness across cratered terrain. But Simonds has calculated everything. He knows exactly how long it will take his forces to cover each kilometer. He knows where every German strongpoint is located. He has planned this assault with the precision of a mathematician solving an equation. The German defenders open fire, but they're shooting blind. Tracer rounds arc through the darkness, creating beautiful and deadly streams of light. Some find their targets. Sherman tanks explode, their ammunition cooking off in spectacular fireballs that illuminate the battlefield for brief moments. But for every Allied tank destroyed, 10 more keep coming. The German gunners are overwhelmed. They cannot reload fast enough, cannot acquire targets fast enough, cannot cope with the sheer mass of armor bearing down on them. Behind the tanks come the infantry, riding in the armored personnel carriers that Simonds has insisted on using despite opposition from conservative commanders. The German machine gunners who have been slaughtering Allied foot soldiers for months suddenly find their weapons useless. Their bullets ricochet off armored hulls. The infantry stays safe inside the vehicles until they reach their objectives, then dismount fresh and ready to fight. It's a revolution in infantry tactics, and the Germans have no answer to it. By dawn, Simonds' forces have advanced 7 kilometers, an achievement that would have taken weeks of conventional attacks. They have destroyed 3 German defensive lines and captured or killed over 2,000 enemy soldiers. The elite 89th Infantry Division, one of the Wehrmacht's best, has been shattered. But this is just the beginning. Simonds is not interested in limited objectives or territorial gains. He wants complete destruction of German combat power in France. The German High Command is in chaos. Reports flooding into headquarters describe an attack unlike anything they have encountered before. Night armor assaults were not supposed to be possible. The Canadians were not supposed to be this aggressive. Where is the methodical Montgomery-style advance they had been preparing to counter? Instead, they face something that resembles German blitzkrieg tactics turned against them with overwhelming force. Hitler himself takes notice. He orders his elite panzer divisions to counterattack immediately and restore the line. This is exactly what Simonds has been waiting for. He knows that German armor doctrine emphasizes aggressive counterattacks. He knows that elite SS Panzer divisions will not sit in defensive positions when challenged. They will come out to fight, and when they do, Simonds will be ready to destroy them. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitler Youth receives orders to counterattack the Canadian breakthrough. This is no ordinary unit. These are the fanatics, teenage soldiers raised in the Hitler Youth program, indoctrinated from childhood to worship the Führer and fight to the death. They have never retreated, never surrendered. They consider themselves the future of the master race, destined to rule Europe for 1,000 years. They call themselves the Baby Division, and they have murdered Canadian prisoners of war with casual brutality throughout the Normandy campaign. Simonds knows all about the 12th SS. He has studied their tactics, read interrogation reports from captured Hitler Youth soldiers, analyzed their combat performance. He knows they are skilled but also predictable. Their commanders are aggressive to the point of recklessness, always choosing attack over defense, never considering withdrawal even when tactically sound. This makes them dangerous in offensive operations but vulnerable when committed to hasty counterattacks against prepared positions. As the 12th SS Panzer Division moves forward to attack, they are driving into a carefully prepared killing ground. Simonds has positioned anti-tank guns in depth, created interlocking fields of fire, and held back his reserve armor for exactly this moment. When the German tanks appear, advancing in the aggressive formations that have worked so well against less prepared opponents, they run straight into a wall of high-velocity armor-piercing rounds. The battle that follows is a masterpiece of defensive gunnery. British and Canadian anti-tank crews, firing the excellent 17-pounder gun that can penetrate any German tank at combat ranges, destroy Panther and Tiger tanks with methodical precision. Each German advance is met with concentrated fire from positions the attackers cannot see. The Hitler Youth fight with suicidal bravery, exactly as Simonds predicted they would. They refuse to retreat even when their tactical situation becomes hopeless. By nightfall, the 12th SS Panzer Division has lost over half its armor and accomplished nothing. But Simonds is not satisfied with defensive victories. While the Germans exhaust themselves against his anti-tank positions, he launches a second phase of Operation Totalize. This time he attacks at dawn, using lessons learned from the night assault. The bombing is more accurate. The armor advance is even faster. The infantry carriers move with practiced efficiency. German units that survived the initial attack find themselves under assault again before they can reorganize. The Wehrmacht commanders in France are beginning to realize something terrifying. They are not fighting Montgomery anymore. They are fighting someone who understands German tactics better than they understand them themselves. Someone who is using their own doctrine against them with devastating effectiveness. The methodical, cautious British command style they had learned to counter has been replaced by something that combines German aggression with overwhelming Allied material superiority. Simonds pushes deeper into German-held territory. His forces capture Falaise, a town that has resisted Allied attacks for weeks. The German 89th Infantry Division, which started the battle with over 10,000 men, has been reduced to less than 3,000 combat-effective soldiers. The survivors are shell-shocked, unable to mount coherent resistance. Many simply surrender when Canadian troops appear, preferring captivity to continued exposure to Simonds' relentless attacks. Montgomery is watching these developments with growing concern. Simonds is achieving results that make Montgomery's own recent operations look cautious and ineffective by comparison. The political implications are dangerous. If a Canadian general proves more aggressive and successful than the great Montgomery, it raises uncomfortable questions about British military leadership. But Montgomery cannot stop Simonds now without appearing jealous and petty. He can only watch as his former subordinate systematically destroys the German forces in France. The German situation in Normandy is becoming critical. Allied forces have broken through the defensive lines that were supposed to hold for months. The bocage country that gave German defenders such advantages has been penetrated. Elite units are being destroyed faster than they can be replaced. And at the center of this catastrophe is Guy Simonds, methodically executing a plan of such scope and ambition that even his own staff struggles to comprehend it. Simonds' next target is the Falaise Pocket, where approximately 100,000 German troops are being encircled by converging Allied armies. American forces under General Patton are driving from the south. British and Canadian forces are attacking from the north. The Germans are trapped in a pocket that grows smaller each day, compressed into a killing zone where Allied artillery and air power can massacre them at will. The German High Command orders a breakout attempt. Elite SS Panzer divisions are tasked with creating an escape corridor for the trapped forces. The 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandard Adolf Hitler, the Führer's personal bodyguard unit, receives orders to attack the Canadian positions blocking the escape route. This is Hitler's elite of elites, soldiers who have fought on every front from Poland to the gates of Moscow. They have never been defeated in battle, never failed a mission. They consider themselves invincible. Simonds has been waiting for them. He knows that the Germans will attempt to break out, knows exactly where they will attack, knows their probable tactics. He has concentrated his artillery in positions overlooking the escape route. He has positioned his remaining armor to create killing zones the Germans cannot avoid. And he has done something that seems wasteful to conservative commanders. He has held back ammunition reserves specifically for this battle. When the Leibstandard attacks, they drive into the most intensive artillery barrage of the entire Normandy campaign. Over 500 guns fire simultaneously, creating a storm of high explosive that turns the breakout corridor into hell on earth. German tanks explode. Half-tracks disintegrate. Infantry companies simply vanish, vaporized by direct hits from heavy shells. The survivors push forward because they have no choice, because retreat is impossible, because Hitler has ordered them to succeed or die trying. Canadian infantry, protected in their armored carriers, move forward to engage the German survivors. These Canadians have been fighting since D-Day. They have lost friends, watched comrades die, endured weeks of brutal combat. They know that the SS divisions murdered Canadian prisoners of war earlier in the campaign. There will be no mercy today. The fighting is savage, close-range combat where men kill each other with rifles, grenades and entrenching tools. The Leibstandard breaks. For the first time in its history, Hitler's elite bodyguard unit retreats in disorder. The soldiers who were supposed to be invincible run for their lives, abandoning their equipment, throwing away their weapons, desperate only to escape the hell that Simonds has created. The breakout attempt has failed catastrophically. The Falaise Pocket remains closed. 100,000 German soldiers remain trapped. Over the next 3 days, those trapped Germans endure an experience that veterans will compare to the worst moments of the Eastern Front. Allied aircraft attack in waves, bombing and strafing anything that moves. Artillery fire never stops, day or night. The roads are clogged with destroyed vehicles and dead horses. The smell of death becomes so overwhelming that even experienced soldiers vomit. This is not war as they understood it. This is systematic extermination. Some German units attempt to surrender, but the chaos is so complete that coherent surrender becomes impossible. Other units try to fight their way out individually, small groups of desperate men making suicidal attacks against prepared Canadian positions. A few succeed in escaping, reaching German lines with horror stories about the Canadian general who fights like a demon, who seems to predict every German move before it happens. By August 21st, the Falaise Pocket has been eliminated. Allied casualties are significant but manageable. German casualties are catastrophic. Over 50,000 German soldiers are dead. Another 50,000 are captured. The elite units that Hitler counted on to stop the Allied advance have been destroyed. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitler Youth, which started the Normandy campaign with over 20,000 men, has been reduced to less than 300 combat-effective soldiers. The 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandard Adolf Hitler has lost 70% of its strength. But Simonds is not finished. He knows that scattered German survivors are trying to retreat across the Seine River, attempting to reach defensive positions in Germany itself. If these veterans escape, they will form the cadre of rebuilt divisions that will fight again. Simonds cannot allow this. He launches Operation Tractable, the final phase of his campaign to destroy German combat power in France. Operation Tractable is an even more ambitious offensive than Totalize. Simonds attacks on a broader front, with more armor, more infantry, more artillery support. He has learned from his earlier battles, refined his tactics, eliminated inefficiencies. The German defenders, already demoralized and exhausted, face an assault that seems unstoppable. Canadian forces advance 15 kilometers in a single day, a rate of progress that would have been considered impossible just weeks earlier. The German 85th Infantry Division attempts to establish a defensive line along the Dives River. This is a veteran unit, experienced soldiers who know their business. They dig in, prepare positions, lay mines and wire obstacles. They expect to hold for several days at least, perhaps a week. Simonds' forces overrun them in less than 6 hours. The German survivors retreat in disorder, abandoning their equipment, unable to maintain unit cohesion. Montgomery sends increasingly frantic messages to Simonds, urging caution, warning about overextension, suggesting that consolidation of gains would be prudent. Simonds ignores him. He knows that this is his moment, that the Germans are broken and need to be pursued relentlessly until they are completely destroyed. He also knows that Montgomery is trying to slow him down for political reasons, afraid that Canadian success will overshadow British achievements. The German command in France is collapsing. Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, commander of Army Group B, sends desperate messages to Hitler requesting permission to retreat to defensible positions. Hitler refuses, orders von Kluge to counterattack and restore the situation. Von Kluge knows this is impossible but cannot disobey a direct order from the Führer. He launches half-hearted counterattacks that achieve nothing except adding to German casualty lists. By the end of August, Simonds' forces have advanced over 100 kilometers from their starting positions. They have destroyed or captured over 100,000 German soldiers. They have eliminated 7 elite Wehrmacht and SS divisions as effective fighting forces. The German defensive structure in France has collapsed completely. The road to Germany is open. The historical significance of what Simonds has accomplished cannot be overstated. In less than a month, a single Canadian general has achieved what Allied planners thought would require 6 months of fighting. He has broken the Wehrmacht's defensive capability in France, destroyed the elite units that were supposed to stop the Allied advance, and created conditions for the rapid liberation of France and Belgium. But the personal cost has been tremendous. Simonds has driven himself to the point of physical collapse. He has slept less than 3 hours a night for weeks. He has personally supervised every major attack, often positioning himself at forward observation posts where he can see the battle unfold. His staff officers worry that he is going to get himself killed, but Simonds refuses to command from the rear. He needs to see with his own eyes, to make real-time decisions based on direct observation. The soldiers who serve under Simonds develop an almost religious reverence for him. They know that he has saved thousands of Allied lives by destroying German combat power so quickly and efficiently. They know that his innovative tactics have given them advantages that make their jobs survivable. Canadian casualties under Simonds are significantly lower than British casualties under Montgomery during the same period, despite far more aggressive operations. Montgomery finally acknowledges what Simonds has accomplished, but the praise is grudging and political rather than genuine. Montgomery takes credit for creating the conditions that allowed Simonds to succeed, claims that the Canadian general was merely executing Montgomery's overall strategy. This is historically absurd, but it allows Montgomery to save face with his British superiors and the press. Simonds doesn't care about credit or recognition. He has proven what he set out to prove. He has shown that the humiliation of General Krar was unjust, that Canadian forces are capable of excellence, that innovative tactics and aggressive execution can achieve results that cautious conventional approaches cannot match. He has also demonstrated something darker, that when a brilliant commander is given sufficient resources and freedom to act, he can orchestrate destruction on a scale that changes the course of history. The German survivors of Simonds' campaign will never forget what they experienced. In post-war interviews and memoirs, they describe the Canadian attacks as more terrifying than anything they faced on the Eastern Front. The Russians were brutal and numerous but predictable. The Canadians under Simonds were something else entirely: precise, innovative, relentless. One German officer describes fighting Simonds as being like a chess match against an opponent who can see 10 moves ahead and has twice as many pieces. The tactical innovations that Simonds pioneered during this campaign become standard practice in modern armored warfare. Night attacks with massed armor, previously considered impossible, become routine operations. Infantry riding into battle aboard armored personnel carriers, initially viewed as wasteful of vehicles, becomes the standard method of infantry deployment. The integrated combined arms coordination that Simonds perfected, with artillery, armor, infantry, and air power all synchronized to overwhelming effect, becomes the template for mechanized warfare that militaries still follow today. But perhaps the most significant aspect of Simonds' achievement is psychological. He proved that the Wehrmacht, despite its reputation and early war successes, was not invincible when facing commanders who understood modern warfare as well as German generals did. The myth of German tactical superiority, which had dominated Allied thinking since 1940, was shattered by a Canadian general who studied German doctrine and found its weaknesses. The impact on German morale was devastating. The elite units that survived Simonds' campaign were never the same. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitler Youth, rebuilt with new recruits, fought with nothing like its earlier effectiveness. The 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandard Adolf Hitler never recovered its reputation for invincibility. German soldiers who had faced Simonds in Normandy developed a fatalistic attitude when ordered to face Canadian forces again. American commanders studied Simonds' tactics with intense interest. General George Patton, never generous with praise for non-American officers, called Simonds' campaign the most impressive armored operation of the war. Patton recognized that Simonds had achieved in weeks what Patton himself had been trying to accomplish for months: the complete destruction of German combat power rather than mere territorial gains. The Soviet Union also took notice. Stalin's generals studied reports of Operation Totalize with great care. The innovative use of night armor attacks influenced Soviet planning for the final offensives against Germany. Soviet officers who had dismissed Canadian military capability were forced to revise their assessments. One Russian general commented that if the Allies had more commanders like Simonds, the war would have ended a year earlier. In the immediate aftermath of the campaign, Simonds continued to command Canadian forces through the liberation of Belgium and the Netherlands. His aggressive tactics remained consistent, though never again did he achieve the same level of complete destruction he had inflicted on German forces in Normandy. The Germans learned from their defeats, adapted their tactics, became more cautious about committing elite units to counterattacks. But by then the damage was done. The Wehrmacht never recovered from the losses inflicted during those weeks in August 1944. The elite formations that Hitler counted on to defend Germany itself had been destroyed in France by a Canadian general fighting with something to prove. The cascading effects of these losses contributed directly to Germany's inability to mount effective resistance during the final Allied push into Germany. Montgomery's relationship with Simonds remained complicated for the rest of the war. Montgomery recognized Simonds' brilliance but never fully trusted him. There was always a sense that Simonds had somehow gotten away with something, had achieved success through methods Montgomery didn't approve of or fully understand. Montgomery's official reports praised Simonds in carefully worded language that simultaneously took credit for Canadian successes while distancing Montgomery from Canadian methods. Simonds, for his part, never publicly criticized Montgomery. In his post-war writings and interviews, he maintained professional courtesy, acknowledged Montgomery's role in creating conditions for success, praised British forces who fought alongside Canadians. But those who knew Simonds understood that he never forgave Montgomery for humiliating Krar, never forgot the dismissive attitude toward Canadian military capability that pervaded British command circles. The personal toll on Simonds was significant. The intensity of those weeks in August 1944 left him physically and emotionally exhausted. He had driven himself to the edge of breakdown, sustained only by determination to prove his worth and avenge his superior's humiliation. After the immediate crisis passed, the accumulated stress manifested in health problems that would affect him for the rest of his life. But in that moment, in late August 1944, as German resistance in France collapsed and Allied armies raced toward Germany, Guy Simonds stood as the supreme example of what happens when genius meets opportunity. He had taken his anger at Krarar's dismissal and transformed it into military achievement that changed the course of the war. He had proven that innovation matters more than tradition, that aggressive execution beats cautious planning, that a commander with something to prove can accomplish what others consider impossible. The German units he destroyed never reformed. The tactics he pioneered became standard practice. The example he set influenced a generation of military commanders. And through it all, Simonds remained the quiet professional, the man who let his achievements speak for themselves, who needed no grand speeches or theatrical gestures to validate his worth. Years later, when military historians analyzed the Normandy campaign, they consistently identified Simonds' operations in August 1944 as the turning point. Not D-Day itself, not the American breakout at St. Lo, but those weeks when a Canadian general systematically destroyed the Wehrmacht's elite forces and broke German defensive capability in France. The battles he fought and won during those weeks eliminated Germany's ability to hold France and created conditions for rapid Allied advance that shortened the war. The soldiers who survived those battles carried memories of Simonds' leadership for the rest of their lives. They remembered a commander who took risks but calculated them carefully, who asked much of his troops but gave them every advantage he could provide, who fought to win rather than simply to avoid losing. Veterans of other campaigns, when comparing their commanders to Simonds, almost always found their own commanders wanting. German survivors developed an almost superstitious respect for Simonds. They spoke of him as some kind of demon or dark genius, a commander who could read minds and predict future actions. This was nonsense, of course. Simonds was simply better prepared, more thoroughly educated in military history and doctrine, more willing to innovate and adapt. But to exhausted German soldiers who had watched their elite units destroyed with surgical precision, it seemed like something supernatural. The final accounting of Simonds' campaign makes for sobering reading. In roughly 4 weeks of sustained operations, he destroyed over 150,000 German soldiers killed, wounded, or captured. He eliminated 7 elite divisions as effective fighting forces. He captured or destroyed over 1,000 armored vehicles, 3,000 artillery pieces, and tens of thousands of small arms and support vehicles. The material cost to Germany was devastating, but the psychological cost was even worse. The Wehrmacht never recovered its confidence after Simonds' campaign. German soldiers who had believed themselves superior warriors were forced to acknowledge that Allied forces, when properly led, could defeat them decisively. The myth of German invincibility, already damaged by defeats in Russia, was completely shattered by what happened in France. And at the center of that destruction stood Guy Simonds, the Canadian general who had something to prove and the skill to prove it. Montgomery's decision to fire Krar was intended to improve Allied military effectiveness by replacing a supposedly inadequate commander. Instead, it unleashed forces Montgomery could not control and achieved results Montgomery could not match. The irony was not lost on observers at the time or historians writing decades later. Sometimes the greatest achievements arise from the most unjust circumstances, when talented individuals are given both motivation and opportunity to demonstrate their true capabilities. What Simonds accomplished in August 1944 stands as one of the most impressive military achievements of the Second World War. It demonstrated that careful planning combined with aggressive execution could overwhelm even the most skilled opponents. It proved that innovation in tactics could multiply the effectiveness of superior resources. It showed that leadership mattered more than numerical advantage, that a brilliant commander could achieve in weeks what lesser commanders could not accomplish in months. The lessons of Simonds' campaign remain relevant today. Modern military commanders study Operation Totalize and its follow-on operations as examples of how to fight outnumbered opponents through superior tactics and operational planning. The principles Simonds applied, the innovations he pioneered, the aggressive mindset he brought to every operation, these continue to influence military thinking decades after his death. And at the heart of it all was that moment of injustice, when Montgomery fired Krar and gave Simonds both the opportunity and the motivation to demonstrate his genius. Without that humiliation, without that need to prove himself and vindicate his superior, would Simonds have been so aggressive, so innovative, so utterly devastating to German forces? We can never know for certain, but the historical record suggests that Montgomery's greatest contribution to Allied victory may have been the mistake he made in August 1944. Guy Simonds destroyed every elite German unit in France not through superior numbers or overwhelming resources, though he had both. He destroyed them through superior planning, innovative tactics, aggressive execution, and the burning need to prove that Montgomery had made a catastrophic error in judgment. The revenge he took was not personal or petty. It was professional and complete. He proved his worth by achieving what others thought impossible, by demonstrating that Canadian forces could excel at the highest levels of modern warfare, by showing that sometimes the greatest achievements arise from the deepest injustices. The Wehrmacht never recovered from those weeks in August 1944. The road to Germany lay open. The elite formations that were supposed to stop the Allied advance were destroyed. And at the center of that destruction, methodically executing a plan of breathtaking scope and ambition, stood Guy Simonds, proving with every victory that Montgomery had made the worst decision of his military career. That is how revenge is taken by military geniuses. Not with anger or emotion, but with cold calculation and devastating effectiveness. And that is how wars are won.